Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
Go above and beyond.
they become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%.
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
With Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast. My guest today is Derek Norsworthy. We're going to talk about a device that can assess traumatic brain injury and probably a whole bunch of other neurological things called NeuroCatch. So welcome, Derek. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Let's start out with just a little bit of background on you. How did you get to work with NeuroCatch and, what do you do right now?
So my background has always been in health technology. I started off as a clinician and immediately just began to see gaps in the healthcare field and ways that I thought things could be improved from a technology standpoint. So quickly gravitated from, began to gravitate towards technology and away from clinical care. That led me into work, with EMRs in the mid 2000s, if you will, all the way up meaningful use stage. After that, I got more involved in actual technologies and how to bring those to market, how to implement them into practices, and then just, get people to adopt things that are new and cool and exciting. I did that for a number of years. I worked as a consultant, and then finally, about a year ago, found my way up to Vancouver to HealthTech Connex, where they have a fantastic commercial product that kind of leveraged a lot of my skills in the background to be focused towards one particular commercial product called NeuroCatch.
Tell me about the NeuroCatch. What is its function as I described, for traumatic brain injury, but what are the predominant things that it's there for?
Yeah, so it's actually very upstream. So I'll give you a little background on it. So our president and co-founder, Dr. Ryan Darcy, is one of the most celebrated neuroscientists in the world. He spent the bulk of his career creating some of the most advanced neuroimaging labs in the world. But what he saw was there was always an accessibility issue there. So patients weren't able to assess this incredible equipment that he was putting in these hospitals. So he kind of made it his life work to take that same quality of cognitive assessment and put it into a point of care tool. So that through that process in about 10 to 15 years of diligent research and continued just effort towards creating a commercial product, we now have NeuroCatch. So that there's a lot of those studies that used to take 3 hours to assess cognitive function in the bottom of the hospital are now rapid at the point of care. We do that in just 6 minutes. So the idea was always to have NeuroCatch to be as synonymous as the blood pressure cuff, and we've achieved that now in its second generation. So in just 6 minutes, we can look at cognitive function, attention, cognitive processing speed, and be able to tell you kind of what's going on with your brain, which has kind of been an esoteric area for people, for some time. So NeuroCatch really brings clarity to the conversation around that data set. And just for clarity on that, so we don't actually diagnose anything. So around, TBI, concussion, those types of things. So anything that's neuro in nature, we actually can provide, what we would say we can drive clinical decision making. So if you think of blood pressure doesn't diagnose, a blood pressure cuff doesn't diagnose high blood pressure. In the same fashion, NeuroCatch just brings really comprehensive, deep neurological data to the conversation to drive clinical decision making, and it's super helpful in the clinical world.
Okay. I mean, what's a common use of the NeuroCatch? Let's say someone's in an auto accident and they're experiencing neurological problems. Their provider recommends that they get NeuroCatch. Like, what will happen?
Yeah, so typically that's a great question. So what happens is we understand, kind of what normal looks like. We have a normative range on the NeuroCatch. So when we scan someone based off their age, and so forth, we can look at their NeuroCatch report and tell if that person is within healthy range or out of healthy range. And we know what healthy range looks like, and we know what out of healthy range looks like. So if you think about it this way, the way the NeuroCatch work, we work with a number of work with things called ERPs, and they measure in milliseconds. So there's certain things that should happen in the brain at a set number of milliseconds. So there's some things that happen, and you should notice something in about, you should hear something new at about 100 milliseconds. You should notice it at about 300 milliseconds, and then you should be able to process what that is in about 400 milliseconds in a healthy brain. So we can tell, just from a NeuroCatch scan that's all automated, whether that person is able to do that in those, set amount of milliseconds, or something's off. And when we see something is off within those milliseconds, if it's fast or slow, we then know what part of the brain is affected, and we can help get people back to that healthy range. So someone who is, cognitively impaired, presents to, clinical setting, we simply just scan that person, look at it, see what's out of range, and then now we know a very targeted approach to what's going on and how to get them back into healthy range with, a number of interventions that are out there.
So what would be like a pathological response? They take too long to respond, or, what about if it's an inappropriate response? I don't know, you show someone a jump scare, and instead of getting frightened, they just, close their eyes or laugh or something.
Yeah, so it's done we actually work through the auditory cortex. So we use what's called evoked potentials, and these are well studied, over 160,000 publications on those. And we use a number of word pairs and a different type of audio stimuli like loud beeps and soft beeps. And through that and our algorithm and machine learning, we're able to create what is a standardized assessment and a clinical report for that. So nothing that would throw that out of sync. This is, well-studied ERPs have been looked at. We've discovered them and been using them since the 60s, but we just kind of brought them, it's nothing new and novel, but the way that we actually apply it into practice is incredibly new and novel.
So, again, someone comes in, I don't know, let's say they're 50 years old, to be assessed, hear these series of beeps and things like that. What will look abnormal? Like, what's an example of what abnormal could look like?
Yeah, so if we talk about someone that's 50 years old, let's just say, they're beginning, things are starting to slow down. They're not, not noticing things as much as they used to, or not remembering things as much as they used to, and just feel a little bit cognitively fatigued. So what we do is we look at the NeuroCatch, and typically where that would show up is when we measure an ERP called the N400, and that has to do with cognitive processing. So we'd see, a change in the N400 is what we would notice there. And that's typically what we see, in the aging population. Obviously, all three metrics come into a comprehensive radar plot that we can look at the brain as a whole. But in that situation, we notice that there's, some type of effect on cognitive processing for that particular age group. And then we would start to put, there would be interventions that we put in place to mitigate that decline in cognition.
Okay. Do you have many people that use it because of, an auto accident where they suffered whiplash or maybe head trauma? What does it look like in that context? What kind of readings might you get instead of someone just being of a particular age and maybe complaining about, memory loss or something?
Yeah, I mean, any type of thing, anything that affects the brain or affects cognition, we'll notice, changes in the waveform and the peak and troughs of the brain, as well as what we call amplitude and latency. So if someone were to come in complaining of any type of change in the brain, whatever the case may be with that, we would be able to notice a change in the NeuroCatch test. And all these different diagnoses per se they present a certain way on the NeuroCatch, and they will change, the whatever ERP we're looking at or the waveforms and so forth. They all have very unique signatures for these, different things that are diagnostic, but we're a little upstream from that. So when we're looking at the upstream changes in the brain for the downstream things that you're describing there, we can actually marry it back to a neural pathway as opposed to, a diagnosis.
So when someone gets this done, what kind of treatments might be open to them that they otherwise wouldn't know about?
Depending on the scenario, but we actually did a study with Mayo Clinic and a supplement company called Thorne. And what they were looking at was hockey players, junior A hockey players. And they were, obviously there's a lot of head impact in the hockey world. Those guys, they like to play rough, as we've seen. So what you look at is impact over the course of a season and how that actually affects, the cognitive performance of an athlete in this particular scenario. And Thorne actually developed a product in partnership with Mayo Clinic that NeuroCatch was used in, and we published a paper on it called Clinical Plus. And it actually has neuroprotective effects that were recognized in the literature and in the research. So there are a number of items like that. So supplements in particular, diet and lifestyle, even with performance athletes, we can actually change up their training programs to where they're doing more unilateral stuff versus just, static lifts and that type of stuff that all changes in the brain. So once we understand, how your brain is performing, how it's processing and interpreting things, we can make all types of adjustments from lifestyle to, supplementations to training, diet, exercise, sleep, hydration, so forth. So all those things the NeuroCatch is able to, help us navigate in a clinical setting. So much so that we're about 10 to 15 times more sensitive than any other device on the market in our field. And to the degree that we can, see very, very subtle changes in the brain. So we're sensitive to everything from a cup of coffee to something, say, like Alpha Brain, that, Joe Rogan's product with the huperzine and all that good stuff. And so we can pick up those changes. And you think of it as a measuring stick and a validation tool to see that, hey, something's going on in the brain. So like right now, if you think about it in particular, like, as a clinician with a background, most of the time when you're bringing forth some type of, cognitive related intervention, whether that be, let's just, supplements for a second. Let's say you were to take had a podcast coming up and you wanted to get ramped up for it. You would NeuroCatch before the podcast and you'd see, okay, I'm a little slow here or I'm fast here and I want to speed up. You take something like Alpha Brain and we would notice a demonstrable difference in cognitive processing speed for a duration of X amount of time. And that's something that you would want to be, that our device is able to measure and validate in real time as the changes in the brain. Funny story real quick. I'll hop in. So our president, founder, and chief scientific officer, Dr. Ryan Darcy, there's a YouTube clip out there where he was being interviewed by someone about the NeuroCatch, and he scanned his brain on the interview that they were doing, and his cognitive performance score just basically, for lack of better terms, it's up. And so he says, as he says in his own words, his ego was a little bit, took a gut punch. So he said, give me 5 minutes. He went away, chugged a cup of coffee, came back, did another NeuroCatch, and everything was back in healthy, normal range. And he was actually able to perform better in the interview. So from the most subtle things to, any type of intervention, we're able to pick up the change in the brain. And that's where we see the NeuroCatch really shining as a validation tool for making changes in the brain. And we're actually able to objectively measure that by looking at brain waves in a portable, quick, and accessible format.
So it doesn't diagnose, but it points to a path of supplementation or activity to help you?
Yeah, so you would think of it as an aid in diagnosis. So, we would, if we said that we diagnose something, that would be, it would actually pigeonhole what our device does. We're actually looking at brain waves and how the brain actually operates. So in the same way as like, if you take a PCR test for the flu, for instance, it doesn't say, hey, you have the flu. It's indicative of, hey, this score is, heading toward, you scored an 80 out of 100. It's very likely that you have this. I'm going to make the clinical decision that you have X. So you think of it as an aid in diagnosis. And there's a number of things that are that way, in the medical field. So like it just recognizes changes in the cognitive profile.
I don't know, are there intervention recommendations depending on what the NeuroCatch sees, or does it need the human interpretation and then, all right, let's try this and let's try that? Like how far along is again, it's not diagnosis, but I guess suggested alteration of treatment?
Yeah. So obviously we know we have a number of things in our toolkit that can either slow things, speed the brain up, slow it down, help you sleep better, and get you back to healthy, normal range. And that, like I said, that's a variety of things out there. We actually have, so as part of the HealthTech Connex flywheel, we have NeuroCatch as our commercial product, but we also have a independent clinical trials portion of our company and a lab called NeuroPeak. And so within the clinical trials part of our company, we're actually able to discover and validate, some of the most, cool and unique tools that are emerging in the cognitive health space. And then we actually put those into our clinic and test them out and see how they work in the real world. And then a lot of those type of recommendations and that type of stuff we can, hand out to our providers as kind of, collateral material that goes along with NeuroCatch for suggestions around improving, whatever area they're looking to do, if it's, cognitive performance or if they're looking to, get back to healthy, normal range following some type of injury or so forth.
Well, what about yourself? I'm sure you played around with it. Like any particular things you could talk about that you've done on yourself or tried?
My background, as I said, was in healthcare technology. I moved into the functional medicine and integrative health space quite a good bit. And, I play with a lot of things to keep it short. there's certain things that we have Dr. Tado, who is he's out in California, and we can show things like stem cells and using laser guided stem cells to improve cognitive performance. I mentioned Alpha Brain, quite a bit. So like we can take an Alpha Brain supplement measure, before and after and notice, hey, this has actually worked for me. Like I didn't just feel something. I actually saw, a speed up, my brain speed actually, my brain actually sped up. My cognitive processing speed got better. I like things, my daily stack. So I take a number of things daily. I take, things like Alpha GPC. I take methylene blue a lot of days, vary my days on that. Take NAD as part of my daily stack. Urolithin A is something else that helps with mitochondrial function that I've noticed really helps with the brain. And then, there's all things. I mean, like coffee, and then I also use some theanine product for focus. So honestly, to be completely honest with you, so what the NeuroCatch actually does, if you're, quote unquote biohacker like myself, is you're actually able to play with a lot of supplements and products out there, and you find out like what each of them are doing and how they're actually affecting your cognition from an objective standpoint. So I could always say like, oh, I noticed something different with this, or I feel so much better when I take that. Now I can say, no, my P300 actually got, better from that, or my N400 was actually faster from that, or I actually recruited less cortex or more cortex when I, took this supplement. So I have like I said, I could dive into the weeds here, but I have a pretty robust cognitive stack, and it really depends on what my day is like. So for me, I'm extremely personalized in the way I supplement and use things around NeuroCatch, and that's in addition to following a super healthy diet, lifestyle, nutrition, exercise, all those different things. But it's really cool once you start playing with the NeuroCatch, how you can really tweak your cognitive performance based upon what your day looks like.
I guess to be a little bit more specific, what have you tried to do and what have you noticed? Like, you have like if you have a test you have to study for, which, it doesn't sound like you're in that world, but, if you have to do an important interview or like when you use it and how do you use it specifically? Like what's an example or two? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah. So like for instance, knowing I'm going to be on a podcast today, so I'm going to need to be very articulate. I'm going to need to be able to think really fast and respond to questions. So if I look at my supplement stack for today, based upon, data that I looked at on my brain, I'll know that I want to take, something to increase my cognitive processing speed. So like we talked about something like an alpha brain or an alpha GPC type supplement. And then I want to smooth that over. So I want to make sure that I'm focused. I'm not all over the place. So then I would layer in something like a theanine to kind of make like a really clean burn on that. And then, on the other side of that, there's a new product that I'm actually working with right now called paraxanthine. And paraxanthine is actually a molecule that's derived from coffee. So rather than me taking coffee and being hyperstimulated, I'm getting that energetic effect from that. So that's kind of like a 1, 2, 3 stack for like a podcast. And then like for daily work, I use things like, I'll combine methylene blue and red light, because red light actually modulates the methylene blue in the body. So I'll take a little methylene blue, I'll stand in front of my red light to activate it. And that kind of just lights the entire body up in a way that the brain starts to, recruit more neurons and function at a more optimal state. Even diet, like, if I have a podcast day coming up, I know if you eat a heavy meal, you can watch your NeuroCatch, go down to the dumps. And we think sometimes that, so we want to be careful about what we're, depending on our day and what we're doing. If we have a big podcast coming up, we might not want to eat a big bowl of pasta before that, because our gut, where, most of our, the gut-brain connection, everyone's heard of that, it'll be slowed down and occupied with digesting food as opposed to helping you get at peak cognitive performance. So like a podcast day or a day where I have a lot of meetings, I'm going to go for a smoothie, something light on my stomach to where my stomach's not spending a lot of time digesting and recruiting energy there when I need it in the brain. So a number of things, but once you start to work with NeuroCatch and see how it, you can have long-term or short-term goals based upon what you're looking to achieve, but it really helps dial things in from a precision standpoint.
What about, I'm sure there's NeuroCatch data on people that take, let's say, Adderall and, more of these heavy stimulants. Like one time I had Adderall, but it was like a punch in the head. It was just, I tried to read, I read the same passage like 20 times. I couldn't understand it. I felt like I was like freaking out. And then I felt horrible when it kind of came down from it. So I was like, way too strong. So supplements work far better. They're not as strong, but they definitely don't give you these horrible side effects. But do you guys have NeuroCatch data on people that take, various prescriptions?
Yeah, I mean, so you make a good point there. And that's where I see the NeuroCatch being a valuable clinical tool is like, so we're not diagnosing anything, but everybody's not a candidate for a pharmaceutical. So, and we don't know that. So like, let's just say, for instance, so Richard comes into our clinic. He says, hey, Derek, I want to think faster. Maybe some Adderall. We give you a subjective exam. We say, hey, Richard says he can't concentrate. Here's a common pharmaceutical that you use there. And then you feel like crap with it because a number of things, either it's something going on with your cognitive profile. It could be the way your body actually metabolizes that pharmaceutical. So when you're looking at something that's more tailored like that, to answer your question, yes, we can see the differences in, stimulant, non-stimulant medications and what's actually happening in the brain. But what we promote with NeuroCatch more than anything is, and would be, kind of my rally for society is to have a baseline cognitive profile with something like a NeuroCatch as part of an annual physical exam. And then you're actually able to make more informed decisions about your health, and your clinicians actually make more informed decisions about their treatment plans with you based upon your cognitive profile.
Yeah, it's like baselining your microbiome. I think that'll be a great thing for people to do too. So when they get sick or something happens, they can, perhaps supplement more intelligently to get back to what it was.
You nailed it. And it's the same way, and we always said, synonymous is the blood pressure cuff. And if you really want to freak somebody out, ask them how their brain's doing. And we have a lot of tools out there. I mean, MRI, we have EEG, but we're a little different because we actually watch your brain in action and how it responds to stimuli, works in the real world, and sees how you're working in real time. So you make a incredible point there, and that's the goal, is to get everybody to understand their cognitive function in a really quick, easy, and accessible way. And it's non-invasive, really quick and easy, and then they can make better decisions about their lifestyle, about their health, and have a better relationship with their doctor by having a speaking piece around it.
Yeah, Nielsen must be revealing, if athletes, boxers, football players, whatever it is, if they get baseline scans and then you see significant change in them over time. I don't know if anything can be done, but I also don't know what it's like to get a series of scans like that and see yourself changing dramatically.
Yeah, you make a really good point there. So for baseball in particular, like a 95 mile, I know this stuff because I look at slide decks and this is what I do in my spare time. So this has nothing to my boring lifestyle, has nothing to do with the NeuroCatch. It's actually very impressive, but I am a nerd and I played sport, and it takes about 470 milliseconds for a fastball to go from the hand of the pitcher to the glove of the catcher's mitt. The margin for error between a strikeout and a home run is 7 milliseconds. That is and you think about 1 second on a stopwatch, if you've ever looked at for 40, we're not 7 milliseconds. So we're talking about fractions of time. So for our performance athletes, everybody wants to get faster. That's a place that we see NeuroCatch really getting a lot of traction right now, is in the performance world with the athletes, because if you're able to think, better, faster, and your cognition is stronger, you show up better on the field. You show up better in the batter's box. You show up better in the pocket because your reaction time is so much faster than your competition. So in the sports world, we like to say milliseconds matter, and we're 10 to 15 times more sensitive than any other product on the market and measuring milliseconds. And we have solutions that can help people improve that cognitive function with our clinic.
Well, very good. How can people find out more about NeuroCatch? Where can they go?
Yeah, I think the best place to lead everybody to is neurocatch.com, which is our website. You can find all kinds of exciting stuff there. And, that's the best place to find us, neurocatch.com.
Well, very good, Derek. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate what you do in the world.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes. You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.